enter your conference code, followed by the pound or hash sign. Thank you. After the tone, state your name, followed by the pound or hash sign. Thank you. You will now be placed into conference.
Saying something different? Oh, okay. I thought you. Did it get windy here?
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press pound 6.
Good afternoon. This is Roger Erickson with the National Weather Service in Lake Charles with our 4:30 p.m. update on Tropical Storm Barry. Going to our next slide, the situation overview. There's a couple of changes that we've got with our afternoon package. First of all, the storm track is basically the same, but the winds look stronger to the west side of the storm out over the Gulf of Mexico. And because of that, we're going to have to extend the tropical storm warning further west inland as well. So we will be issuing a tropical storm warning now for Calcasieu, Beauregard, and Vernon parishes. It's also changing a little bit of the wind speeds that we're expecting in southeast Texas as well. So we'll discuss that as we go through the slideshow here this afternoon. The first bullet point on here, we're still expecting Barry to become a Category 1 hurricane before landfall tomorrow morning in south central Louisiana. We're still looking at 10 to 20 inches of rain. That can be life-threatening somewhere in the St. Mary, Iberia, St. Martin parishes, where people potentially could get trapped in their homes. Storm surge over 3 feet still possible in coastal sections of Vermilion, Iberia, St. Mary for Intercoastal City, Delcombe, Henry, Sycamore Point, and Burns Point. The damaging wind threat, the highest area is going to be in south central and central Louisiana, but we could have some scattered outages as well over here in southwest Louisiana and more isolated in southeast Texas. Also, isolated tornadoes are possible across the path of the storm from south central Louisiana up into central Louisiana. So here's the tropical wind warnings. You can see in the darker shade of red there, we have the tropical storm warnings, like I said, for Vernon, Beauregard, and Calcasieu. That's new. We're continuing it for the other parishes to the east, and we're continuing the hurricane warning down at the coast for Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary and Lower St. Martin. The flash flood watch got extended further west as well. We now have Rapides, Allen, Evangeline, Jeff Davis, Acadia, and Eastern Cameron Parish in that as well, all because of the fact that there may be potentially rainfall that could go a little bit further west than where we're currently forecast. The storm surge warning continues for the same locations down at the coast. And our table here is pretty much the same as well in terms of what we're looking at. So the big threat still is the rainfall and the flooding that we're expecting, followed by the winds and the surge. Here's the latest forecast track. No significant changes to the track. Barry's still a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm with winds of 65 miles an hour. There have been wind gusts out in the Gulf of Mexico on some oil platforms that were upwards of, I want to say, 75 or 80 miles an hour. So very strong winds out in the Gulf from the outer rain bands and the situation out there. So we do still expect Barry to become a Category 1 hurricane before landfall. And even though the forecast cone that you see on here does not cover our entire region, we could still see heavy rains and strong winds. So everyone needs to stay up to date with our latest forecast as it is updated through the night and tomorrow. This is the latest satellite view of Barry. One of the swirls that we've been monitoring today became the dominant one. In fact, became the dominant area of low pressure based on aircraft reconnaissance that flew into the storm. And so they pulled it a little bit further north, close to the coast of Louisiana, south of Terrebonne Parish. Wow. Okay, so I'm hearing that no one can see the slides. I've got it turned on, so I'm not sure why you aren't seeing it. Nothing I can do from my end. I'll be emailing the slides at the end of the show here for you. So the swirl seen on the satellite, like I said, one's become the dominant one close to the coast of Louisiana. The storm motion's very erratic still, and sometimes because of that, it redevelops like it did this afternoon. The next slide shows the tropical storm wind probabilities. We're looking at 90 to 100% chance of tropical storm force winds in south central Louisiana. 50 to 70% chance for tropical storm force winds extends across southwest Louisiana as well as central Louisiana. The hurricane force wind threat is predominantly south central Louisiana and a little bit up into central Louisiana. But based on the current forecast track, we're not expecting hurricane force winds in southeast Texas or southwest Louisiana. So for the wind threat, we're looking at wind gusts of 70 to 85 miles an hour in south central Louisiana, where you can see numerous power outages and wind damages. Wind gusts of 50 to 65 miles an hour is expected in parts of southwest and central Louisiana, where you can see scattered power outages and wind damages. And then wind gusts of 30 to 40 miles an hour is possible in southeast Texas, where there will be isolated power outages and wind damage. So that's kind of the three-tiered system that we're looking at. Less in southeast Texas and the most over in south central Louisiana, kind of a staggered view from west to east. The timing of the winds, Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary could see tropical storm force winds this evening. The remainder of south central Louisiana will see tropical storm force winds later on tonight, and central Louisiana can see tropical storm force winds beginning in the morning on Saturday. In fact, when we look at the table, we're looking at, even in southwest Louisiana, we're looking at potentially Saturday morning for the timing of when we could see tropical storm force winds. Mainly during the morning through the afternoon hours. Hurricane force winds has not changed. We're still looking at Lafayette, Iberia, Upper and Lower St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes, as well as Vermilion for the potential for hurricane force winds. The graphic for the storm surge impacts is the same as what we've been showing earlier today. And forecast precipitation is very similar. We're still going 10 to 20 inches in Vermilion, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary. 4 to 8 inches for Cameron, Jeff Davis, Acadia, Lafayette, Evangeline, St. Landry, and Avoyelles parishes. But something that's really important to make everyone aware of here is that, wherever the rain bands develop, that's where the heaviest rain is going to be located. And so these long, narrow swaths of heavy rain are difficult to pinpoint even 24 hours in advance. So pinpointing the exact location, odds are not everyone's going to see these big numbers, but there's going to be spots that are going to see these big numbers in areas wherever the rain bands develop tomorrow, and they'll continue into Sunday as well. Let me back up also and say something else about the storm surge. Even though right now we're not advertising a storm surge problem for Cameron Parish, by Sunday the winds will shift out of the south when the system is well north of our forecast area. And when the winds shift out of the south, we do expect the tides to run above normal on Sunday in Cameron as well as southeast Texas. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see some minor coastal flooding on Sunday, especially during high tide for both Cameron Parish as well as Jefferson and maybe Orange counties. The excessive rainfall outlook for Saturday basically shows the high risk in St. Martin, Iberia, St. Mary parishes, the moderate risk for Acadia, Lafayette, St. Landry, Vermilion, and Avoyelles Parish, and roads could become impassable and homes could have water coming in these areas. We have an updated forecast for Bayou Vermilion near Karen Crow. We have a crest near 19 feet on Sunday to Monday. The crest for 30th Street gauge is 15 feet, which is moderate category on Sunday. The Morgan City gauge for the Atchafalaya, they did not change the forecast there. They still have it at 9 feet on Saturday. However, as a reminder, with this big rain drills that we're talking about, the Stevensville area is expected to have significant flood problems. So this graphic here shows the flooding rain threat. Basically, the extreme flooding rain threat is St. Mary, Iberia, and St. Martin Parish, both upper and lower. Whereas major flooding rain threats is extending in parts of Vermilion and Lafayette parishes, with a moderate flooding rain threat in parts of Cameron, Vermilion, Jeff Davis, Acadia, Lafayette, Allen, Evangeline, St. Landry, Rapides, and Avoyelles parishes. The tornado threat for tomorrow is most of our forecast area except probably southeast Texas. On Sunday, the threat is mainly in central Louisiana, and we're only talking about a 5% chance. So we've got moderate confidence that the event's going to occur in that regard the impacts. The strongest wind gusts basically east of the Cameron to Alexandria line, with the highest values between Lafayette and Morgan City. Storm surge in the coastal areas of Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary parishes. Flooding rains in south central Louisiana, especially Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes. Isolated tornadoes in south central and central Louisiana Saturday and Sunday, and then dangerous marine conditions. So for our key takeaways, we're still expecting a Category 1 hurricane before landfall tomorrow morning in south central Louisiana. We're still expecting that life-threatening rainfall of 10 to 20 inches over there in St. Mary, Iberia, and St. Martin parishes. The storm surge over 3 feet for coastal areas of Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary. The damaging winds is going to be a threat from southeast Texas to south central Louisiana, lower threat in southeast Texas, much higher threat in south central Louisiana, and then we'll have for isolated tornadoes as well.
The leader has
We will do
unmuted
another
your
briefing,
line.
of course, tomorrow morning at 10:30, but I've got the mute button turned off to see if anyone has any questions, and I apologize if you guys weren't.
Okay, well, to basically summarize what we were thinking for tomorrow with the landfall of Barry, we're pretty confident, at least, that it's going to make a landfall across south central Louisiana. One thing to note, our landfall forecast is about the same, but the issue is once it moves inland, it's actually nudging a little further to the northwest, and that's why we talked about it at the office. We're going to go ahead and issue the tropical storm warning for Calcasieu Parish and Beauregard and Vernon parishes as well. It looks like the tropical storm force winds will likely brush up against these parishes. So what does that mean? We're probably expecting winds in excess of 39 miles per hour, up to potentially about 50 miles per hour, we think, over Calcasieu Parish. So what does that mean? Well, definitely if you have loose objects in like patio furniture in a yard, those need to be secured. High-profile vehicles on the bridges, there could be issues there. Also, too, power outages. We definitely, even with tropical storm conditions, can have a good amount of power outages as well. And really, the other thing to really be concerned about is we don't, as Roger mentioned, we don't have a good feel yet on how these bands of rain are going to set up tomorrow. And it's possible it could reach into southwest Louisiana. We do think the heavier rains are going to fall to the east, but it's not uncommon for a narrow band to stretch west from the system. And we'll have to be monitoring it throughout the day, but these can actually produce bursts of heavy rainfall in a short period of time and can certainly lead to localized flooding. So, are there any questions? Just one other thing I'm going to add here, and this is just something that Roger mentioned with regard to storm surge. We're not really expecting a storm surge with the landfall, but what happens with sometimes these landfalling tropical systems is once they're inland and a really good onshore flow develops or flow from the southeast or south, we then start to see a pretty good increase in tide. So I don't think it's going to be a big issue, at least for Calcasieu Parish, but certainly for Cameron Parish, Vermilion Parish, and so forth. There could be some coastal flooding there. We're not expecting a big surge, but certainly tides will likely be above normal, at least through the early part of the week.
Thanks, Andy. Got a couple elected officials with us today. Lynn Jones, Clerk of Court. Wendy Aguilar, almost forgot you last time. Tax Assessor, and Marshall Vic Salvador. Any other elected officials here? Okay. I think the major change here is the wind. We were talking earlier that we were not going to have that kind of threat, but the immediate thing that comes to my mind with a 40-mile-an-hour sustained wind is I-10 bridge and 210 bridge. I think all of the law enforcement guys already recognize that part of it. But along with that, we're talking about sustained winds, not gust. The gust could be half again as much higher, and that's going to cause some sporadic power outages, whereas before we didn't think we were going to have a big issue with that. Is Margaret Harris here?
No, she's not.
Oh, okay. Oh. Yeah, I got a question. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Okay.
how many days on a tropical storm, how many days power is it going to be before all of the power would be restored?
We're looking at about 5 to 6 days if it's normally a Category 1, but hopefully a lot sooner than that. But we'd like to give a conservative number of about 4 to 5 days.
Okay.
And we
So-
send our crews out once winds are under about 25 miles per hour. So we have crews on standby that's ready to go once we can get those sustained winds down and get out there in the field and get it going.
Okay. The reason I mention that is because at the wind speeds we mentioned earlier, that probably was not going to cause that big of an issue, but with these winds being elevated to this level, power outages are a very real possibility. And I see Andy shaking his head on that. Everything else is the same. We don't have a report on the ESFs today. If anybody has any operational questions, I'd be glad to take those. Anyone have any questions? As reported earlier, we've had a couple of mutual aid requests. The agencies involved are still, they want to hold their forces back until they see what happens here before we release them to go to other parts of the state. And again, if you get any requests and you need some help with how to work those, make sure you get in touch with us. We will be here for the morning briefing tomorrow. We'll reassess after that on what the weather looks like, on how long to open the EOC. But we'll make that announcement after the weather briefing tomorrow. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.